So I'm joined today by Sarah Bennett-Nash, now personal branding and life coach. But as much as we will talk on that side of things, someone I wanted to bring in because of the success you've had in the compliance world, but not just the success you've had, because you've had endless levels of it, also the fact that you moved from one area to another on quite a frequent basis. And that's such a hot topic that we get asked about, like, how do I develop my career? For anyone that isn't aware, Sarah was on the equity side at Goldman's, moved to the controls environment, and then the control room, Morgan Stanley Deutsche, from there to Paribas, into private side advisory from the control room, and then to head of compliance for Standard Chartered. Number of which are moves that we just don't see on a regular basis. I think personally, mainly because people often don't have the courage to even go for it in the first place. Because when we have discussions on skill set and relevancy, people go, well, this is where my comfort zone is, or this is what I know. And in that guise, the reason I wanted to have you here is to kind of ask the question, like, how did you develop the way you developed? How did you manage to make moves that other people don't seem to make?
Well, it certainly wasn't all by design. I will definitely say that. I've reflected on this quite a lot because I think it is unusual for people to reinvigorate their careers like that. But I love climbing a mountain. Mm-hmm. I really get into the challenge of it, and I like change. So I think when you bring those two things together, it's hard for me to be in a role for a really, really long time. So once you feel like you've got to the top of the mountain, I'm like, what's next? I'm looking for that next big thing. And I've really enjoyed some of those challenges and just growing and morphing every single time. You sort of stretch yourself into this really uncomfortable zone for a while, and then you get into the zone of it and it's comfortable. And then you're thinking, okay, how can I stretch that again? And I think a big part of it is definitely in my personality. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm very high adrenaline in anything that I like to tackle. But also I love people and I love networking. And so when we were talking about this yesterday, I really reflected on this in terms of how I have moved around. And a lot of it is because I've really invested heavily in my network. Mm-hmm. And that's just been superb. Like, whether it was internal network and really building that from the ground up, or thinking about how you can navigate externally as well. Mm-hmm. So lots of events and getting involved. And I just really always gravitated towards people and, just building that network. I think is really critical in any role, but also in life too. Mm.
How do you find those events then for people looking to do the same? The internal networking piece is something we can come back and I think is probably easier. I spoke with Mark Taylor the other day, whose guidance was go and find people in other areas, probably one corporate title above where you are, and ask them, what do you do? Guide me, teach me, train me, help develop me, mentor me, and those bits and pieces. I think there's a variety of obvious paths internally, but externally, you mentioned events. How do I go and find those events? What type of events?
Plug yourself into the matrix, I would say. So look at where your specialism is, and then literally just go on Eventbrite, and you can Google it on Eventbrite and go search for it. And in the financial crime space, for example, just in London alone, there will be tens of events, small groups, big rounder tables, and then the big conferences. And once you're on that circuit, you find that people then will start to contact you. So I'd reach out to people more senior and ask them in your teams firstly. But then if you're not getting the events that you want, then just have a look, because in each of the major cities, there's lots of these different types of groups across all of different compliance. But also, don't limit yourself to compliance, because if you want to understand more broadly about banking, as an example, there are loads of events that are run by some of the bigger investment banks that have an open door and allow you to go and be an attendee. And they're really interesting to understand what's happening in the broader market.
Mm-hmm. And when you were hiring yourself then, if you see on someone's CV that they're actively getting involved in that, they instantly jump out? That's important? That's a prerequisite? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. In any role, really whatever you decide to do in your career, being a differentiator is super important. There are lots of people that won't be as active, but if I'm going to hire somebody, I want them to have natural curiosity. I want them to be continually learning. That's one of my key values. I've always brought that into my career, and I'd expect anybody working for me to do the same. And that just sort of sparks real, like, deep expertise. I think once you start getting out there and not only just, doing your day-to-day role, but going over and above that, just shows that you have a real passion for what you do. And I would always gravitate towards somebody who has elevated themselves in that way.
And then, so how do you demonstrate those skills externally? Like some of the moves you've made, equities advisory into a control focus role. I get that there's overlaps, but if I'm the hiring manager, surely there's more obvious people that are doing the doing now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it depends what you are looking for, because I'm a big believer in most things are teachable. And so for me, it's more about the behaviours of the person. So are they willing to learn? Are they going to come in, roll their sleeves up and get involved? Or are they just going to come in and just kind of tick the boxes? Like, sometimes you need people for stability in teams to do that. Not everyone's going to want to set the world on fire, but you also need leaders who are really keen to progress. So they're role models and they're bringing everybody else through with them. And I think bringing people in with transferable skills, like for example, that change that you just mentioned, I brought a whole load of skills into that team because they were all control room specialists, and really changed the dynamic of the team. Now, it wasn't always like very well liked, but bringing in diversity of skill set means that I could really advise on the equity side, which they were really lacking advisory knowledge in that space. And I really brought a different dynamic to the team. So when the traders were calling us, wanting very quick guidance on things, I could give it because I understood the market, I understood the products, and I understood how to apply the regulations. So you can give a quick answer. Whereas if you haven't sat in a trading floor and understand how it works, A, you have no perception of how quick people need the information. And it's also quite difficult to conceptualize actually what they're doing and how your piece of it marries up. So you can actually speak the same language. And that's really important in terms of communicating concisely and getting the right outcomes. So I think each change that I've done, I was trying to come in and refresh people's education around the topic that I'm known for, but also be really respectful of the knowledge that they have too. When you bring that together, you actually grow as a team, and I think that can be a really nice dynamic. It can kind of shake people up a bit, which is not always that much fun, but I think on the whole, if you're all growing together, it's a really great place to be.
Yeah. And how does that then work? Like if we look at the top level, I mean, fundamentally, you went from being a head of private side advisory to being a head of compliance with a team of 50 odd people, I think.
Yeah, we were about 45 at that point.
Right. So correct me if I'm wrong, but there must be people in that team that have got specialisms that you don't have, that you're now managing and guiding how they go about what they do, or you're empowering them to do what they do and you're there as a sounding board, or you're asking them to teach you what they do to then manage them in that guise? Or
It's a leadership role.
Yeah.
In leadership roles, it's very difficult to understand all of the different disciplines across a big team like that. And it's certainly very difficult to understand the regulation in all of the different countries, because that was a Europe role, as an example. So that's why you hire the specialists, so they understand the deep-rooted nature of that regulation. So it's about leadership, and it's about building trust early on with your team, and about setting a culture where people share knowledge. So you're all upskilling, and that's something that was really challenging in the beginning, because the country matrix can be a bit tricky to all bring together. So everyone has these really nuanced regulations, and they don't always come together particularly well. So it's about building bridges and ensuring that people can work together, and you're never going to have all the knowledge. So it's about working with people to unlock the knowledge and make sure there's enough trust that things are being escalated appropriately.
So from my side of the fence, when I get opportunities where people can step up into a role, whatever, let's imagine I was working that standard chartered role and I get told, hey, we will consider people that aren't doing it right now. 20 odd years of recruitment, I find if I phone most male candidates and say to them, I've got a new role, they ask me the firm name, the company, and a rough salary bracket and give me a yes or no straight away. I find that when I phone most female candidates, they ask me to read the job spec, they want to go through the bullet points in detail, and then regularly the next conversation I have after a period of digestion of the profile is, I can't do that role because I've only got 7 out of the 10 things that they've listed as skills that are essential there. Can I do anything to change that, or do you think there's a reason for that, or is there some kind of barrier I'm missing? Or
I think some of it is around mindset, and some of it is around role modeling. So classically, have we been great at moving people to do very different roles in that space? Maybe we're not seeing enough female role models doing that. But there are certainly, as you say, there are enough men moving around doing it. So there's definitely a difference, and there's definitely a gap that we need to address there. And I think it's a lot about mindset, because you can't know everything. And when you're in a place where you are safe enough to grow and stretch and make mistakes, oh my goodness, you just unlock something entirely different from that person than you would if you just kind of climb the ladder the traditional way. And I think there's definitely a mindset piece, but there's also a piece around confidence. And I am really confident in my skill set in that if I don't know it, I'll use my network to figure out how to get that information, or, you naturally kind of organically find it. And then you just have to trust your skill set enough to be able to just go, right, okay, I'm going to give it a go, and then just jump off and do it, because that's the hard bit, right? Is having the courage to leave. And in my case, I left a career at BNP Paribas. I've been there 6 years, and it was the unknown. It was a much bigger role, but I was so excited about it, and I knew that my key skill set around working with people was really needed at that time. And I was really confident in that skill set. So I didn't know all of the different disciplines, because I hadn't worked all of those different roles, but I knew what I could do is unlock the power of the team for enable that to function. And the experts do their role, and I do my role as a leader. So I think for anybody who's looking to do something a bit different, you don't have to jump off and do something quite dramatic, but I think just giving some things a go, even in a smaller setting, pick up a project that you wouldn't have normally done before, but you're curious, you find it interesting, just flex the muscles of courage and give them a go. And try it in a safe space first, and then make the big leap. But fundamentally, it's about having the confidence to trust your own skill set that you can do it. Because ultimately, everything's teachable, right?
Yeah, of course. And in that guise, we've built the courage ourselves. We feel ready. We've got to get noticed elsewhere, right? And that's then that hesitation point. There's kind of two different discussions here, right? Again, when I engage with that piece on speaking to senior females, one of the things I have been guided on is apparently if there's a list of bullet points, the female mind works in a certain way and is likely to assess itself against the bullets. Whereas if I wrote that in a collective prose paragraph, they're more likely to read it as a collective and think, actually, collectively, I do more than I think, rather than ticking it in boxes. So there's bits I can do to help encourage people. On the flip side, if I go to a client and say, hey, you want a head of compliance, I've got a head of private side advisory, they go, well, where are the other heads of compliance first, right? We're paying you a fee for something. So what can you do to develop your personal brand to get spotted, to get the chance to get in the room in the first place?
That's the key question to ask. How do you build your personal brand so that you do stand out and the natural selection is going to be you above all of the other candidates? Because in any industry, there's a lot of people, right? So it's about how do you distinguish yourself? And there are multiple different ways of doing it. Like the first one is just making sure that your online presence is really reflective of who you are and actually what you contribute to not only your role and your team, but the industry, the wider industry as a whole. If you care about what you do, and that's the first thing that you're going to want as a hiring manager, knowing that somebody really cares and they're passionate about what they do, you want to be engaging in those types of activities, the networking that we spoke about, just getting involved in the industry, making sure you have a platform is always great. So any kind of authority building exercise like public speaking, really just demonstrating that you're an authority in your space is really great for your confidence, because once you get up and either if you're in a panel or you may be doing a keynote solo, you actually realise how much you know, because you don't often just stand and speak for 40 minutes. Now, I think starting off on a panel is a great place to be, and then maybe build up to the bigger ones. But doing any of those types of activities, getting to the round tables, there are some fantastic round tables in the industry, and you get to meet some really incredible people. You never know when you might need them. And everyone in that environment typically wants to help each other. And so when there is a big role that comes up, you're naturally going to be talked about, and you don't have to do all of that work. You're already pre-positioned as a natural person ready to step up into a role like that.
And so if you were attending some of these roundtables in the past as a hiring manager, whatever, I'm picturing 10 people in a room all talking about whatever, control room issues or whatever it might be, you're making judgments on the people in the room as it goes, right? So when I come to you in the future and you say, hey, I need a new head of control room, and I go, well, here's 8 of them, instinctively you've already got a preconception of who they are and what they're about from what they've delivered in that meeting, or the courage they've had, or the way they talk, or the quality of information, or all of it, or
absolutely. In fact, the control room roundtables are a very good example, because we used to have really tight control room and roundtables, and we always used to swap, and everyone knew each other. It's a really close environment. And I would absolutely pick up the phone directly to the people that used to speak out in those meetings and showcase that they had really good knowledge. And of course, when you host one of these things, you actually get to choose the agenda, you get to drive the conversation. And again, it's a really good opportunity just to showcase what you know. And actually how you're making some positive changes in the industry too. Financial crime is another really good example where we have really tight groups of people. And again, like I've picked up the phone directly to people who have gone to those types of roundtables to ask, if they'd be interested in a role. And I've hired people successfully because you've already got the rapport. You know who's coming through into your team. You know they're going to be a good fit. And you've had a taster already of what it's like to work with that person. And so it's much more appealing than going for a cold client, a cold hire who you've never met before. But again, you're going to be picking up the phone and speaking to the other heads and understanding a little bit more about this person. I mean, maybe we're not all talking about it, but that does happen. When you get to the end rounds of hiring someone and I don't know this person, I will always go out and get sort of a flavour of opinions, because people can be very, very good in an interview situation and then not the person when they've got a bum on a seat. And yes, very interesting psychology, but sometimes it just doesn't work out quite as you thought it had. So I think getting a second opinion, and again, that's like using your network, and it all comes from those types of events where we all know each other, is kind of what happens behind the scenes.
Oh, definitely. And we see that from our side of the fence. Like, I've had countless occasions where I'm asked, whatever, get me a head of control room. I get together a short list, anything from 3 to 8 people that are keen. And the hiring manager phones me up and says, actually, these 3 are superb. Definitely bring them in. Like, they're genuine options for us. These 2 I'm undecided because they're quite quiet when they go to these events. They don't really speak. So I've got nothing negative to say, but I've also got nothing positive. So the other 3 kind of rank above them. But when I pause and reflect and when I engage with people, a lot of people struggle with like the anxiety of being there in the first place and the overthinking of, am I being judged? Am I being assessed? Like, do I speak up? Do I know my stuff or not? And I completely agree with the point you made before. I remember going to a pitch myself relatively early on in my career and without sounding horrendously arrogant, walking out thinking, oh, I actually do know what I'm talking about, right? Because I'd never been asked the questions before. And suddenly I was like, oh, wow, I'm half decent at what I do. But I think for a lot of people, there's that anxious moment at the start where it's like, I don't want to say something, and then 9 people in the room go, couldn't disagree anymore. But it's also more powerful to do it, isn't it? Like if you talk and you're talking in Chatham House rules with people that are industry experts, surely that's the place to speak, and people should be encouraged to. Or
Yeah, I mean, it's like anything. You know, remember the first time that you started a new gym and you have no idea where anything is, you can't work the lockers, you've no idea where the water is, and it feels awkward and clunky. And then 2 weeks later, you've part of the furniture and you've just been there forever. It's the same as speaking. It's the more you do it, the more relaxed you become about it, and actually your brain starts to function in a different way because it becomes normalized. And eventually you get to a point where you can stand up in a room of a couple of hundred people and actually deliver something. We just kind of build up on that, and after a while it just becomes much, much easier. But you have to have the courage to start. That's the key thing, is just having the courage to just start the conversation. And that's why networking is really good. Even if you don't feel comfortable talking on a technical basis, go to some networking events where you know nobody. And it doesn't really matter if you get it wrong or you feel a bit awkward. You go and do that 10 times and you'll start working the room rather than it being the other way around. It's just building up the knowledge and just building up just the skill set of being able to do it. Like anything, it's all learnable.
How do you find the time to do it? Have you always been encouraged by the companies, or you've had to ask, or you've had to build a business case to go to these things? Or?
Honestly, I've always been so fortunate. I think if you want people to learn and grow and develop within a career, and most corporates will want their employees to flourish.
Yep.
It's part of our rich tapestry. We are inherently tuned as social beings to want to go and learn and grow and meet other people that are doing the same thing. I've always been so fortunate to have people that really understood that as line managers. And so particularly at Standard Chartered, I think they actively encourage, because it's great for the brand. The more people that are going out and talking positively about the great work that you're doing within your organisation, the better it reflects on the brand. And that sort of travels because people talk and they talk about, when you go for a new job, you'll always go and ask some people that work there, like, what is it really like to work here? And you probably, if you're curious and you like to learn and you find out that you're chained to your desk for 10 hours a day, you're probably not going to go and work there. So I think it's a part of the culture, hopefully, that people are encouraging that, because your career grows and you grow as a person, and people are just much, much happier.
You mentioned before the importance of developing your online presence, or having an online presence that matches who you are. I've got to think the right way to phrase this, but I get frustrated on a daily basis because as a business, we probably don't do enough online for the world to know we exist. But I see rivals of mine putting whatever, I've just had a bacon sandwich for breakfast and this is what I've learned about compliance recruitment because of it, or whatever. And I just think it's utter nonsense. But then there's definitely people that see it and think, well, hold up, I know you exist and I didn't know you exist before. So when you talk about that personal brand piece, is all content important? I see so-called experts saying just post it. Don't worry about what it is, just post it. Is it better to have something that's poor quality? Is it better to quality over quantity? What matters? When you talk personal brand and online presence, what's the guidance?
I think it really depends what platform you're on. If we're talking LinkedIn, because that's our professional platform that we use, content really does matter. And so I really would be considerate around what you post on LinkedIn, because it's representational of your brand. And so you want it to reflect your beliefs and what you stand for, because that's what distinguishes us as a brand. And you also want it to be really authentic, because that's when it stands out, because it's unique, it's your blueprint and no one else's. So content, particularly on LinkedIn, really does matter. So there will be some changes in that space, as an example, where, because I know lots of people will post newsletters every month, as an example. But we know the content is purely AI generated and no sort of really thought leadership has gone into that. And LinkedIn wants to see unique, diverse perspective on things that really add value. So if you're not adding value, I wouldn't post it, because the way that LinkedIn works in terms of the algorithm in the background, it's just not going to show your content. So it's not going to be a good use of your time. But if you are contributing to newsletters, you are doing lives that are really valuable, the algorithms love that, and you're regularly posting content where people are getting true value from it, then rather than just like a self-promotional post, which I see a lot of, then you will be able to develop your own niche in your space, and you'll start to really stand out. Like there are some people in the D&I space, as an example, that do this superbly well. They are, they've got a cause, they've built a community, and they're really standing for something purposeful, and they're using that as their platform to make a real difference. Now, you definitely see it in other spaces, but maybe not quite as passionately. But in the financial crime space, as an example, there's a massive opportunity to really make systemic change if you use the platforms well. Because the more we talk about how we fix the problems in that space, everything that we know that leads to things like people trafficking, there's tons of issues in there. The more we can make systemic change happen, and that makes the industry a better place for us all, and it gives us a much better reputation. And I think that's super important, that we're using those platforms for good and creating a community that actually helps other organisations, because not everybody has all of the great access to resources like some of the bigger banks would have. And they're also not as active. So the more you create community around it, the more you can get everybody involved, and more of these good practices start to then rumble down and actually start to make a difference. It's the ripple effect, isn't it? It's like the small things make a big difference over time.
Yeah. So if I was thinking about something actionable I could start tomorrow, let's picture me in a compliance career rather than a recruitment career. Where do I start? I go and become a guest at events. I build up the courage and the knowledge to become a speaker at events, and then I publicise that side of things and make sure people are clear and see me being active? Or do I start producing content now about my market, or try and...
I think the easiest way to do it is to start producing content in something that you're really passionate about. So if it's in the financial crime space, choose a segment of a big industry that you're really passionate about, where you feel like you can really make a difference, and then double down on that, get really involved in it, and you'll start to build a community around that fairly quickly. And then once you're known for that on those platforms, because it's the safe space, isn't it, to post, you don't have to put yourself out there in terms of a big thing like being on stage. You can build your confidence up, and over a period of time you're getting all of the expertise coming through, which of course you're applying to your job as well, which is amazing. And then build up to round tables are a great place to start, just sitting in there, understanding how they work, getting the intelligence, and just build up then to a stage where you showcase what you know, and you've got a bigger audience that you can influence. And then of course they go off and talk about your keynote and what great things you can change. So it's a great platform.
Yeah, and I think we see it from the bottom to the top already, right? Like I just think you mentioned Standard Chartered before. You obviously spent a good period of your career. And Bill Winter's personal brand is now almost a hot topic, if that makes sense, right? And you can see that evolving with time, or I certainly feel like I see it evolving with time.
I love what Bill's done with his LinkedIn profile. It's no longer about results driving profit. He really talks about the areas he's really passionate about. You can see his personal brand coming through. He does a lot of work with the arts, and it's really getting to know him. And as an employee at Standard Chartered, I really valued that, because I didn't physically see tons of Bill all the time. You wouldn't expect to. But I felt like I was starting to get to know him a lot better, because he was divulging a lot more information publicly. And it's wonderful. Not everybody wants to do that, but it is wonderful as an employee, feeling like you really know the leader of your organisation. And I think it just leads to more transparency and more openness along the, it sort of rolls down then through the different levels, and people really enjoy having that level of openness. And he was a really good example of someone who really led on that and became, as you say, like really well known for it. His posts, I still read them now. They're really engaging. They're really insightful, and he gives a lot around leadership, which is obviously something he's really good at. And we can learn a lot from him in terms of how to lead. It's a really great skill, not just like the technical stuff around banking, but actually like what has he got to offer as a leader. It's really insightful. He's a real thought leader, I think, in that space.
But it's very noticeable, the change that's happened over the course of time, if that makes sense. It's, as you say, like from going from quarterly financial statements and not much more or narrative around it, to I've seen a couple of times him putting selfies up with various people as he's visiting offices and stuff like that. And when I think about whatever high quality, low quality content and stuff like that, that human touch of the engagement with staff around the world, I think is really important for anyone, right?
He becomes relatable, doesn't he? He's one of us. No longer is he in an ivory tower. He's with his people who are fundamentally driving the organisation forward at mass. So I think he's done a really wonderful job on that.
And I definitely think from this side, like from the outside looking in, I think when people start careers in recruitment, they're scared of like the senior people because they're deemed to be daunting or whatever. But actually the biggest thing I'd say over 20 years of doing this is one of the key skills that most senior people have is just making you feel comfortable in yourself, no matter whether they're speaking to someone senior, junior, or whatever, or anything in between. It really is that personable side to things. And actually that then links into the personal brand when you see them being themselves. It starts to open the doors to people having the courage to speak to people and speak to people more senior and try and grow. I think, it's all fascinating stuff. What about timing of stuff like this, right? Like maybe this sounds flippant to say, but I've got a young daughter. Up until she arrived, I was willing to commit all day, every day to work the evenings, work the weekends, whatever's needed. I had a period then of sleep deprivation where I couldn't remember my own name, let alone any candidates' names. And I now feel like I'm coming out the side and getting back to a bit of normality. But at the same level, I still need to leave early a couple of days a week for picking her up, and I still need to come in late a couple of days a week to drop her off in the first place, etc. There's a lot of commitments that fall on myself. Openly admit there's more that fall on my wife, but do you have to time it right? Like when you're developing your personal brand, when you're thinking about doing something new, like to move from one role to another role, there's got to be so much learning and so much pressure to learn at speed. Can that happen to anyone any time, or would you guide people towards certain times? Or
I think ideally you would be strategic about it, because starting a new career and then having a baby is just not conducive to having a load of fun in your life, honestly, because you know, as you say, it takes a few months to settle into a role and to then have an impact in that role, especially at the senior leadership end. That's the expectation, is you have a big impact. You have to give it all. And I think strategically organising things so, you know, one of you has, let's say, the big job and one of you is like in a comfort zone, or can at least give a bit more of themselves during those periods of time, because it is so intensive, isn't it? For the first year, I mean, there's so much happening with a young person that it's just so much to then think about how do you stack a new job into that. It's, you know, it's very overwhelming. You know, part of my journey, I don't know if you know this, Ben, but when I started BNP Paribas, I think I was 6 months in and I found out I was pregnant. And our first baby was IVF, and so we were so shocked that the second one had arrived, and it was not ideal at all, because you know, still very early on in my career then, and I just remember telling my boss the story with just an absolute dread of what was about to come, and he was phenomenal about it. He was absolutely phenomenal. He also has kids himself, but is that
a big part?
I think so. Yeah, it's just that level of empathy, because it's very hard to know what it's like to have a young baby.
That's why I asked. I hold my hands up and say, over the 15 years of Black Swan, until I had my own children, I definitely wasn't supportive enough to people that had them. I never realised how full on it was, how hard work it was. And we've probably lost good people because we didn't give enough flexibility at the time, because we didn't really realise how crucial it was until we went through it ourselves.
That's why diversity is so important, isn't it? So you have a level of empathy, that you can only really have sometimes if you're in that scenario.
Yeah.
Like I had it too. I remember, working really long hours and actually getting quite annoyed by, it was typically the women, I have to say, but not always, but typically the women that would be leaving to go and, bolt off to go and pick somebody up from nursery, and you'd be like, I'm going to be here for the next 2 or 3 hours picking up all of this stuff. But, this is why we have team and diversity. So hopefully not everyone's doing that at the same time, and you can manage it. But, I think strategically timing things as much as you can to sort of map out things. But it doesn't always work like that, does it? But, the first years are definitely quite challenging. So stacking in new jobs and things.
Yeah, no, it makes sense.
Not advisable.
And having lived through it and stuff like that, does it affect things? I'm just thinking, whatever, once a year a promotion run comes, you've got 45 odd people in your team. The individual that disappears at 4:30 every day because they've got to pick their kids up every day of the week, in comparison to the one that's able to stay for 2, 3, 4 hours later every day, that's a factor in development or growth, or?
I sadly think that some places will value hours more than they do quality of production of work. But we can both have people doing an 8-hour job and produce very different outputs from those roles. So you always go for the person that produces the best quality and can actually maintain deadlines and things. But sadly, it's not always the person that has a new baby, as an example. It's really challenging to do that unless you've structured things at home so that you are really strong on just saying, okay, well, this is my time. I'm doing the big job. You take the other job, and then off we go and run it that way. I think having those kind of conversations with your partner is so fundamentally important, because you can't pick up everything. You can't do necessarily the big jobs, 60-hour weeks, be at the school gates, and do everything else that requires you to be there as a parent. You kind of got to balance it and have those really difficult conversations. And so between my husband and I, we have this bonkers color-coded diary, and we sit down every Sunday night and we go through that, so we know where we all are, and who's doing what, and there's tons of structure around it. And you get help. You get your squad together of people that help you in those scenarios if you're both working. So you just work it out, don't you? It's a bit chaotic sometimes. But
it's exactly that. We're doing the same. We're having discussions where it's like we've got to work out what dinner we're having during the week, so that we can, when someone walks through the front door, they know today's my day, I'm going to go cook, and we don't have to have those discussions and things delay, etc. Talk to me about coaching. Coaching now is the focus for yourself. That's been part of your journey, or that's been something that you experienced, or something that you wish you'd experienced, or?
It's been a massive part of my journey. I have a profound liking for psychology. I love it. So I've always been really interested in humans anyway. And then I started this journey really when I was at BNP Paribas, and I started upskilling in this area and found I loved it. And if you're going to be a team leader or a leader of any sorts, you really need to have some of these skill sets. And I hadn't really appreciated actually how powerful some of the things that you learn when you're a coach can be. And actually not just in your career, but also at home. Like I think about scooting up to school on a daily basis, and actually how much coaching I do on that 20-minute trip up to school. It's really valuable skills that I use all of the time. And so I sort of naturally built that skill set during that role, actually, while I was doing the private side compliance role, and I had my team at BNP Paribas. But then the bigger the role, the more you lean on those skill sets. And it just became something that I absolutely loved. And when I sort of look over with fondness my 6 years at Standard Chartered, you actually spend a lot of your time when you're managing teams in that type of role, coaching teams, coaching one-on-one. And I've just absolutely love it. So when I was sort of thinking about, what's next? What do I want to do? That's actually a big part of my life. And so I just wanted to build that into my business. So coaching is a part of what I do in my business. And then I've sort of built around like other products around that. But I still definitely do take my one-to-one clients on because I'm still learning. You know, we're discussing, so my niche is all around business growth. And so I'm still learning how to do that too. You know, I'm in stage 2 of my business. I've got a long way to go to, you know, have the impact that I want to make. And I find coaching a great way, bouncing ideas off each other. And of course, I'm in coaching mode, but I'm also learning a lot as well from other people. So I absolutely love it. And, you know, if you're thinking about taking a leadership role, I'd absolutely go and do one of the phenomenal courses that are out there that really drills down into framing things in a way that you can make people feel comfortable and that they can open up to you and that you can build a level of trust. Which is a skill set I didn't really have until I started coaching more formally.
And so your guidance to people isn't necessarily to go and get coaching themselves, it's to go and learn how to be a coach.
That's right. Yeah, some people have a sort of secondary plan and they might want to move into that at a later stage. And I think that's a really great quality to have. I mean, watch your space in this industry because there's a lot happening. And I think it will look quite different, the coaching space. But the reason why I sort of went and got qualified was because my boss had talked about, you know, a great course that he'd been on. And I was really inspired by him. I was like, okay, I'm going to do that too. And I did, and it just unlocked this whole new... And I actually found a change in him as well after he'd done the course. Like, he's sort of like style changed, and he was a lot more... less directive and more open, I think, in terms of allowing us a bit more flexibility to, you know, fail, because that's an important part of the process. And we talked about that a lot more, but also just learn how to do things ourselves and be less involved and, you know, managing it in a different way.
So if I was going to go and get myself a coach now, how do I work out who the right person for me would be?
I would definitely go with a referral. So I think there's such a wide variety of quality of the coaches out there. And I'd also go for someone that really fits with your style, because you will be spending a lot of time with this person. You know, most coaches will want to work with you for 6 months. That's a long time, and you do a lot together in that space. And my clients, you know, we're on, if I'm not speaking to them week on week, we're on WhatsApp all the time because we're building and there's questions coming through. So it's a real beautiful but sometimes quite intense relationship. So you want to enjoy it. You want to have fun. And you want to make sure that that person's going to vibe with you. I think that's the main thing. But, you know, not all coaches are qualified because it's not a regulated space. But I think that it's important that they do have some credentials. So I'd definitely have a look at that and do your due diligence around that. I wouldn't be a compliance officer.
I was going to say, as a compliance officer, does that not frustrate you?
I mean, do you need, if you're sort of a seasoned leader, having led, you know, teams and organisations, do you need a coaching qualification? You're probably naturally doing a lot of it already. But what the qualifications do, they just give you structure and frameworks that you can work from that help unlock a new level. And so is it fundamental? Do you absolutely have to have it? No. I think it is a good North Star to have a look at before you delve in, because, you know, some coaching packages are real commitment financially, so you want to make sure it's going to be something that's valuable. And I think that does help. But I'd also just be thinking about personality, like how does this work between you? Because you're going to be building something together. So you want to have a bit of fun along the way.
And if I was to go to see a coach, should I be doing it because I've got a purpose, like I've got something I want to work towards and hence I go and get a coach? Or just for everyday development, just for me as an individual, it's worth spending time with a coach?
So I work with people that are scaling businesses. So we've always got like a real structure around goals and revenue goals and income goals and what we're going for. But I really see the value in life coaching too. So if you've got a specific thing that you want to work on. Like we've talked a lot about public speaking. You get specific public speaking coaches. What they will focus on a lot of is how to build confidence and how to walk into a room and own it. And there's a real skill set around that. So, I think just find the person with the right niche for that situation, but definitely go for life coaching. I mean, I think it just opens up so many different neural pathways. You think about things differently.
Yeah.
We talked a bit about confidence. It enables you to really step into things that you probably wouldn't have done before had you not done some sort of coaching in your life. I think it opens up just wonderful pathways. And as I say, particularly when you've got kids, it just enables you to have a new toolbox that enables you to cope with things a lot better. Like there are very niched parental coaches that will help you with toddlers, as an example, and not being coached around how not to lose your mind when you're having an argument with your toddler about something very benign. It's really useful, because those moments are really real.
100%.
Aren't they?
Yeah,
you're trying to get to work on time,
Yeah.
and you've got a toddler having a meltdown. That's stressful. But coaches can help you work through coping mechanisms to do that, and actually how to deal with an irrational terrorist that you live with.
That's so true, though. It's such a big influx on your life. I did some emotional intelligence training a few years ago.
Amazing.
And it's one of the best things I've ever done. I mean that so seriously. Because it opened my eyes to things that I just never considered before. And there's certain bits and pieces I remember so clearly. One of which was the individual running. It asked us, you wake up in the morning and you look outside the window and it's raining, how does it make you feel? And everyone's writing down their answers or whatever. And 3 people in the room had written like excited, happy, etc. because they like that type of weather. And most people had written sad, frustrated, annoyed, whatever it might be. And the individual stood in front of us and said, "What do all of you work outside then?" And we said, "No, we all work in the office here." And he was like, "All right, and do you all walk to work?" They're like, "No, we all get the train or the tube." He's like, "So you're indoors all day, every day, but you're frustrated that it's raining outside when you're not even there." And everyone just sat in silence, but it was like, yeah, I haven't really thought about it. It's like, so why is something annoying you and changing your mood and emotion when you're not actively involved in it? And it sounds silly, maybe that's a side example, but then he talks about find the music that empowers you, right? Because music can change your mood and emotion. And if you find yourself in a dark place, find that things that brings you back to a good place. And that's the big thing when I talk to people about coaching is when you feel like you've gone a bit stagnant or a bit flat or hit your glass ceiling or full of frustration, actually just having the chance to express that out loud and to have someone help you process your own thought pattern is such a powerful tool for your development and gets you back on track to growing again.
Oh, massively. Because there's never a linear pathway, is there? It's always a bit sort of rocky. But I totally agree with what you just said. And a lot of it, like coaching just unlocks a different perspective, like you described. And they give you the techniques. So Tony Robbins talks about this all the time, doesn't he? You've got to move, you've got to get the energy through, and that totally shifts your mood into something completely different. Now, if you'd known these types of techniques, if I'd known these types of techniques when I was in my 20s, you would have unlocked a whole new life probably. 100%. So, I think it's really valuable. A massive advocate of coaching, obviously.
Yeah. So our learns from today, just for us to wrap up, think about your personal brand.
Absolutely.
Think about your online presence. Think about where you can value add and knowledge share with other people. Get involved in events as a guest and lead or build the courage and confidence to become a speaker or actively involved yourself. And think about coaching. Think about how it can help you grow, how it can help you develop, but time it right, if that's the right way to phrase it. Because there are certain life obstacles that make life a lot harder, right?
Definitely. Timing is everything.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Sarah. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you.